when you really love somebody, I mean, the idea is truth is the baseline. I want you to be your greatest self. And I want to be my greatest self. How do we baseline? How do we make that the foundation to support each other to be our greatest self versus suppressing each other, or I'm afraid of you growing into a higher expression of yourself, or vice versa, right?
You know, it's like the recognition of that level of depth of inquiry is actually the recognition of your own depth. To deny one's depth is to live on the surface and the superficiality, which doesn't mean you can't love Lamborghinis and you know, all the fast lives. It's that you can't pretend that you don't have this incredible depth to your being.
This is the Roxanne Show. Get ready. It's time to rise. So Mark, you know, what's so exciting for me is that I know right away with you, I can just drop into the deep end. It's been such a joy to come to know you, at least through your work, through social media, and other avenues of taking in your work. We have mutual dear friends who absolutely love you. And so learning more about you and what you stand for and what you share has been really great for me, really inspiring for me. And there's a lot of resonance with a lot of your messaging. I'd love to start by reading something that you wrote, and I'm gonna bring up a bunch of your quotes throughout this conversation. And I would just love to hear you elaborate and kind of tease it out.
It would be my honor.
Okay, so spending our lives on our heels is not a way to live. It takes falling on our ass to, wait, let me say that again. It takes falling on our asses to right the ship and say, hell no. I'm going to choose my life. I'm going to claim my purpose. I'm going to say yes, finally, to what is being asked of me. Why do you feel that people struggle with saying yes to, I'll insert, self-ownership and essentially uncovering their authenticity?
Well, I'd say that the majority of people spend their lives not authentic, you know, and we have all these protective mechanisms that we use, which come from a really beautiful place. They're survival based. So, you know, we wear these masks in order to manage relationships, maintain connections. You know, in our early childhood, basically till around the age 8, you're learning about who to be in order to be loved, in order to create safety, in order to maintain a connection with family, if that's possible. And we don't really grow out of that, you know, because what worked then, though, won't work as adults. In relationship, it won't. You know, we can live our lives, spend 50, 60 years with someone and never be fully self-expressed. You know, and I think now more than ever, because there's more opportunity and to meet people who might have similar perspectives or have similar desires. Like if you want to become an entrepreneur and you didn't grow up around entrepreneurs, that's a huge transformation. If your parents struggled, worked 9-to-5s or maybe 9-to-9s to put food on the table, the idea of becoming an entrepreneur is not infused in your DNA. If anything, it's terrifying. Yeah. So I think a lot of us struggle with it also because shame and fear of not belonging is often weaponized in order to create behaviors that fit within, let's say, our family, our religion. All those things tend to be pretty synonymous. So shame formally would collapse us. And I think when we have the recognition that there's an us that hasn't been brought alive and hasn't been expressing, we do experience what I would call a healthy sense of shame, which is probably hard for people to delineate, especially if they're familiar with Brene Brown's work, because she would say, guilt is I did something wrong, shame is I am something wrong. But there's also a shame that's present when we're acting in a way that's not moral for our own values. But also there's shame that shows up when we have a better behavior available to us and we're not choosing it. So I think in that learning and that recognition, hey, I've never really fully chosen my life. Oh my gosh, to confront that you have choice means you have to process that you haven't been using it. that is usually where people stop. And I would say in a large part, that's a large source of why we have addictions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what would you say in your life, in your experience, has there been a standout moment, or has this been kind of like a slow coming process for you to really connect with your authenticity, your authentic self?
I think there's slow moments, but they're usually catalyzed by large decisions. And what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, my first real come to Jesus moment, I don't mean that in a religious sense, was like I got engaged when I was 27. I didn't want to get engaged. I didn't know why I got engaged if I didn't want to get engaged. That made no sense to me. So I knew there were social things going on that were beyond the rational mind. And when I ended that engagement, I remember looking back and thinking, how did I get here? Like, how did I get to a place I didn't want to be in? I spent a lot of money doing it. I drugged someone else along, and because I was afraid to hurt them, meanwhile hurting them. And I remember thinking, like, how did I get so disconnected from myself? And I had this recognition that I hadn't been choosing my life. Like, literally, I'd been making the choices, but I wasn't. It was like an automated self that was checking boxes and making sure I was becoming who I was taught to be, like get a job like this. I did an undergraduate degree in finance. I don't even like finance. Like, and I was a pharmaceutical rep, which I really at the time did enjoy, and it was a fun job. But and then it's been a slower burn. And that was the recognition of, if you haven't been authentically who you are, or parts of you haven't been brought alive, you go on this very amazing adventure that also is filled with grief that you haven't. And so I would say that the next larger iterations of that probably came during COVID. That's where I was like, oh, there's a desire for me to be more outspoken about some of the things that are going on that I don't agree with.
Yeah.
The use of psychological tactics that I think are unethical. And I can either stand in the truth of that, or I can go along to get along. And, this is how codependency leaks into our businesses, into our self-expression. It's like, am I willing to lose what I've built and the identity that I think is solid and who I am? But is who I am someone who stays silent amidst suffering, even though literally 90% of people see it somewhat differently or are captured by fear, which is understandable? So I'd say that was a large wake-up call. I was thinking about this recently, that usually it's large decision points that reconnect us to our authentic self, but it's what starts to we become more aware of, is that it's actually not large decisions that will be the points we look back at having the most meaning. It will actually be the small decisions that don't lead eventually to large deviations that require us to rescue ourselves. And I've had to rescue myself a few times, and I recognize that it's actually because I would ignore the small voice that's saying, hey, left here, right here, speak here, don't, leave this, start this,
It's so good. And I have to bring up a quote because you just took us there. This is another piece of your beautiful writing, by the way. Your writing is gorgeous. Our intuition isn't about the future. It's about guiding our path for the next few steps. It's about shining a light on what is currently in our lives. It is drawing us towards a future we cannot see. We cannot see because it doesn't yet exist, but we can feel. This is what it means to trust. I needed to remember that. I hope that is supportive for you. So this is, in your epic newsletter. But I love that, because where you just took us with, those small, in the moment, listening, hey, go this way, do this, don't do that, et cetera, et cetera. So immediately, it makes me think of, that's a lot of your intuition. And I'm also a firm believer that how I frame it is, your intuition is the voice of your heart, and your heart is your authentic self. There are no shoulds that live in the heart, right? It's a sharp fucking yes or no. And we have to, it's a skill to be able to really, first of all, hear it acknowledge it, and then execute from it. Right. So I love what you pieced together there too, because intuition can feel like this big, just, and I don't want to use the word overwhelming, but like it can feel overwhelming to some people who don't really grasp it. I love how you break it down and say that it's not about the future. It's about the right here, right now, every next minute moment, and your ability to listen and to feel within.
Yeah, to be with that. I think a lot of us, when we're looking for answers, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out that it's not what we know. And, I recently was speaking with a friend who's struggling to figure out whether to stay or go in a relationship, but he's not. He's, for 3 years, had the same feeling that he's trying to figure out what's wrong with him, that he wants to leave someone that he loves and he cares for.
Yeah.
And, at some point I said, listen, like, we've had this conversation for 3 years, and I've watched you suffer. I've watched you develop stomach issues. I've watched you develop anxiety that you tell me you can't label or name, but I'm watching it manifest as that because you want the answer to be anything but what you know. And his greatest fear is hurting somebody. And I said, that's so beautiful. That's such a beautiful thing that drives the way you make your way through the world, but you're hurting you.
Yeah.
Like, you've learned to suffer so that someone else doesn't suffer, but you're also saying, I know their path better than they are being called towards, and also that I'm not honoring the path I'm being called towards. So two people must deviate in order to not have someone experience pain. I mean, we live in this current culture is very emotionally pain phobic. We have, it's like accommodate everybody's emotional suffering. And I think it's Van Jones who said, like, no, it's diverse thought. Like, that's the weights in the gym. You want me to take the weights out of the gym? And I think we can be guilty of that, especially people pleasers. Hands up here. I've done that. I still do that. It's like afraid to tell someone the truth because you don't want their feelings to be hurt. So you live in a world where the truth isn't real. That's dumb. And it's selfish, and it's martyrdom masquerading as altruism. It's bullshit. And I say that as to someone as I say it to myself, because it's true.
I completely agree with you. Often when I talk about, because the authentic self is a core piece of the conversation for me, self-mastery. It's like that's your ticket to entry to self-mastery. You're not living a life of mastery without, choosing your authentic self. And I am a firm believer in how I frame it is you got to pick your pain. You got to pick your discomfort, because in the moment when you're choosing to betray your authenticity, perhaps even with some kind of intention that seems, well, I don't want to hurt the person, but you're still betraying, you're still betraying yourself. And even if you don't feel it immediately, it's very insidious, and you do it there, you're going to do it in other places, and now it's going to create the greatest separation between you and you. And that, I mean, you talk to so many people, and that is, to me, one of the greatest sources of suffering, if not the greatest source.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. It's so interesting how we're like, I can't figure out why I have anxiety. I can't figure out why I'm depressed.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, if your choices are depressing, if you are depressing emotional expression, if you are creating a future you don't want, if you're suppressing emotions, it's going to express as anxiety, and then it's likely going to express as depression over time. So these are all warning signs. They're like the canary in the coal mine, but we've been taught in our culture that there's a drug for that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not minimizing someone's experience of the need for a pharmaceutical, but it's to say, like, what happens if you oriented to your mental health challenges, not from the place that there's something wrong with you, that you are currently experiencing a mental health challenge, but there's actually something right with you. That, like, these are the exact emotions you should be having when you exist in a world that is the world we're in. It's like the book from Gabor Mate and Daniel Mate, The Myth of Normal. It's like, it's perfectly normal to feel dysfunctional in a dysfunctional world.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. I wonder for you, you're a very introspective individual, and it's really easy for me to just, I get that from you very quickly. And so I imagine that for you, you probably place a premium on questions the same way that I do, right? Like self-inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to individuals who, in terms of like helping them uncover their authentic self? What kind of questions can they start to ask themselves to just put themselves in this position where they can start connecting with their authenticity?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And, I think if anyone's even thinking about like, what is my authentic self, it's a good sign that you're on an adventure. And instead we often orient to personal growth from a place that it's evidence of brokenness. And, I like to always shift people to say, like, you might not know who you are because you've made your life about other people, or you created a quote unquote self to become successful or whatever, to manage, but to create safety. So they always come from a beautiful place. So we have to be compassionate, because that's the only way the armor comes down. That's the only way the ego starts to dissolve. So I'd say the first part is to look for what areas of your life feel heavy. What areas of your life feel heavy? Where do you feel safe to self-express?
Yeah.
For some people, that answer will be nowhere. Now, the important part is recognizing that as an adult, you can decide to create relationships that actually value that. And if you find yourself in relationships where people don't value your opinion, it's because you don't yet. So we can be the victim of the circumstances, absolutely, and recognize that it's not emotionally safe, but we also have to do something with that knowledge. And recognize that, if we're playing small in life, starting to raise your voice and raise your volume is going to disrupt things. That's not evidence that you're going the wrong way. It's usually incredible evidence that you're doing it the right way. Now, I think a lot of the times we get loud first and maybe a bit destructive. That can be one of the ways we do it. We burn everything down. That's not always the answer. Sometimes for some people, I don't want to say it's not. But I think learning how to begin to identify, what do I want? What do I need? A lot of people don't even ask that. Like, what do I want? Who am I? What a beautiful question. A good way to even figure out what you value, which I think is the ultimate goal, because a lot of us adopt other people's values and then call them ours, is you just look for who you admire. And who you admire usually is someone who embodies the values you desire. And then once you know what your values are, which I'd say start with 3 core ones, then you look at every area of your life and you say, is this aligned with my values? Yes or no? If it's not, what would need to change in the relationship and in me to make it aligned? Can it? And do I want to? For some, the relationships won't shift, and for others, they will. And what a beautiful invitation to liberate other people to self-expression, and that everyone we're in relationship with.
Yeah, that is really epic. I'm a firm believer in, identifying your core values. I love that you've said a lot of times it's not even your true value. It's what you've adopted, right? That can come from your upbringing and what you think is a value. And I often direct people to, sometimes it's interesting. I'm curious what you think about this. I find this was a thought that I came to not even that long ago. I was like, I think sometimes for an individual to actually uncover a true value is to be living in the opposite of it. And there's this discomfort, this pain, this just, it can be very subtle at first, but it starts to get louder and louder as you dig deeper away from the value, right? So if somebody was living out of integrity, and maybe inherently integrity is a value, but they're just not aware of that yet, right? So they're living out of integrity, and something doesn't feel right. And then we'll just fast forward this. Maybe there's a Mack truck moment, and all of a sudden it becomes aware, like, I'm just living in a way that doesn't feel right to me. I need to right myself, my life. And they start living, behavior start changing more within integrity. And they get to this place where it's like, now integrity really does matter to me. And I'm actually living the truth of somebody who is, who values integrity. But I had to live out of integrity to get to this place to come to understand that this is a true value of mine. I know that was like a long way to fucking say it, but what I value about that is like, that's an honest, you can really own that value now. It's not, oh, I think I should live with integrity because everybody says that's a good way to live, or my parents said that. It's like, you learn the hard way that that's actually something that really matters to you. Do you find that, sometimes the path to is to be moving in opposite of?
I mean, I'd say the path is almost always that way. We don't know congruence till we know incongruence. It's like I know Alan Watts talks a lot about contrast, that you don't have black without white, you don't have on without off, you don't have all of these. It's required, but it's like, can you pay attention? My wife uses this beautiful line in her book where she talks about how, her body was the somatic canary in the coal mine. Like her body was throwing up signs and signals. We talked a bit about like anxiety, depression, gut issues, right? These are all any manifestations of the experience of disease, and I'd say especially gut issues. Those are usually a really big sign. Things like hypertension, things like, and again, these also correlate on a biological level to what we're choosing to put in our bodies. Is it in integrity?
Yes.
You think about, if you're funneling technology into your eyes, you're probably funneling processed foods into your body. They're both technologies, and they're both not organic. They're both not real. It's like connecting via text with all your friends, but you still need to be with people. You still need, your nervous system is an ancient technology that you can't bypass. You need to be sitting in rooms with people and learning how to co-regulate, how to be in calm with other people instead of enraged on social media. And it's like, I'd say I'm not even sure that people can have a healthy relationship with social media. The jury's still out on that for me. I mean, I'm exploring it now.
Well, I just got to tell you, because you put a post up yesterday, and it was there was one not too long ago within the same context, and both of these I mean, I'm just on the other end of the screen going, fuck yes. Your whole breakdown about, it's like an abusive relationship. And you break it
really
down
is.
so eloquently, and it makes so much sense. And I think that message, and I mean, if you want to share it, because I'd love for it to live in this conversation. But first of all, I've never heard anybody articulate it that way. And I do believe that it's it's really a perfect way to describe it. From my perspective, I really do feel the same way as you.
Yeah, I was feeling really, over the last 3 years, about 3 years ago, I had what I would say, I Googled, am I having a psychotic break or a nervous breakdown? I didn't have either, according to Google, but I felt like I was in a conversation with my team at the time. And, in 2020, my business had really exploded. Everyone went online, and I had hired I think at one point I had 9 people. I was basically working to pay salaries. And so everything I did that I loved about my work started to become a job again. And, I went from working, when I was a rep, I really liked it. But, now I went from working a specific amount of hours every day to working basically 24/7. And it's like launch after launch, I need more content, I need more content, I need more content. And it's like, it's fascinating because I would have said that I was turning the faucet on like full blast, which you think about your adrenals, you think about all these different things, full blast for a long time, never stopping, never pausing, till I was sitting at a table with my team, and they were asking for me to meet with a company about something, and I just couldn't. And I remember saying, I just had this moment where I had my head in my hands, and I thought, on the other side of this, I'm afraid what's going to happen to my mind. Like, I was afraid my mind was going to fracture because there was no more capacity. And I started crying. And I took a month off social media. I let go of people right away. And I was like, okay, I took a month off, and I hadn't stopped. I had created 1 to 3 posts a day for 8 years.
Holy shit.
Yeah, and at some point I hired someone to run my social for the previous like year and a bit. But they weren't creating. I was still doing the filming and the writing and all the things.
Yeah.
And I hired someone again. I came back to my work and, all this same time, all this stuff's going on in the world. And I'm recognizing that, wait, now even these platforms, if I use the wrong word, will take my business away. So I was living with a lot of anxiety about like, wow, I can't, how I've oriented to the world hasn't changed. I'm still curious. I'm just asking questions.
Yeah.
I'm not saying don't do anything. I could give a shit what people do. So I found that, so I started a separate Instagram account where I could fully self-express about what was going on in the world and it wouldn't cost me my business. But then I recognized, well, my business was already affected because I'd been shadow banned. And again, I never broke a single rule, which tells you.
Yeah.
So this replicated a lot in hindsight to me, the way that abusive and narcissistic relationship dynamics exist, but also toxic families. It's like, we'll give you access to abundance through posting, through building an audience. We need your content. So you look at these platforms, they use creators. And if you're on social media, you are a creator. You're putting content on it and creating engagement. So you become a conduit for the extraction of people's attention. Now, the question is, this is where it replicates these relationships. One, it's a mysterious algorithm. You'll never know how it works. We're never going to tell you. And the moment you think you know, we change it. So now there's a new trending audio. Videos aren't long anymore. We don't like them sideways. We like them vertical, and they need to be under 90 seconds because we know that's what extracts the most from people. And we don't like static posts as much, written ones. So we're going to make those not be seen by as many people. So you start to alter your art. You start to alter, and don't get me wrong, I see value in learning how to take a message and make it shorter, etc.
Sure.
But you end up also losing the observation of long form dialogue in complex perspectives. So it ends up rewarding short form, emotionally inflammatory content that, of course, leads to more division.
Yep.
Because we're not watching adults have conversations about, things like safety of getting the jab, of like, wait, is a lockdown a good idea? Is that supported by data? Instead, what happens is any opposing perspective, and name the ideology now, is instantly villainized. So I started to see, first off, there's no psychological safety to have a conversation. You're on eggshells because you might say the wrong thing. If you say the wrong thing, not only will you risk any belonging on the platform, but you'll also risk being financial being taken from you, much like an financially abusive relationship. And I started, when I was journaling about 2 months ago, I was thinking, I feel powerless in my relationship to social media. Why do I feel powerless? Oh, because I don't have control over what they deem good or bad, even though I have this history of creating good, quote unquote, successful content. And now all of a sudden I just can't figure it out. So normally what people will do when they recognize they're operating, because that's a codependent pattern. I'm selling myself out. I'm erasing myself. Our definition in our book is that we are depending on something or someone outside of ourselves to source safety, security, and at the expense of ourselves and our needs and our wants. So I just had this recognition, like normally when people are in those types of relationships, they reject the relationship. So delete the app, delete the person, delete the... But I was like, you know what? I actually want to figure out, can you be in a powerful relationship with this experience? I'm still in the drawing board on that one. I'm not sure, but I really wanted to refine. That's why I did the video the other day, because I really wanted to refine why I was feeling this way. And my experience is that I would say 100% of creators that I know who have businesses on social media are experiencing at least a low level of anxiety about this. And to me, I'm thinking, wow, this is interesting that we're consenting by participating in this behavior. I'm not sure what the answer is, because like, how do you build a really scalable business? Like, is this considered the cold calling of today? I was thinking about that too. Like, I used to cold call, go door to door, and talk to people.
Yeah.
Back in like when I was in high school, selling something. And it's like, is this the same idea? Like, is this part of the eat the shit sandwich for the hustle? I don't know. I still haven't figured it out yet. So
It's a good
these are just some of the
question.
things percolating.
Yeah, no, it's so good. And you also express in the post, that there's value you see the value in social media. I believe you met your wife through, right. So it's not this complete, throwaway of the platform, but it's presenting those questions. And what I really do love too is that it's this idea of be discerning, because you will very quickly be used by the very thing that you're trying to use to, fill in the blank, business, whatever the situation you got going on. And I think that message is so, so important, because on a deeper level, I think everything for me is on a deeper level. One of my core values outside of integrity is autonomy. And that has been a through line for me my entire life. And even, just reflecting back, and I can see as a kid how that was before I knew what a core value was or even autonomy was, right? And you think about, so to me, authenticity and autonomy go hand in hand. When you betray your authenticity, there's something that's ruling you, whether it's a fear of whatever, right? So I think of, this really interesting situation with social media. And I think that it so quickly will steer you away from your autonomy. You're being owned by something the minute you start to, especially if you're someone who goes, oh, okay, well, let me try and adjust to everything that you are presenting. That's important for me to, if my content's going to be seen, then I need to do this and that, even if it's not authentic to what I really want to be creating and sharing. And so I think of it so much deeper, right? Like if you're doing it here with Instagram, where the fuck else are you going to be doing that in your life?
You're doing it everywhere. That pattern is an imprint from childhood, usually, and that. I love what you said, though. It's that correlation of autonomy and authenticity, because you're right. As soon as you lose authenticity, you're tethered into something. You're not autonomous. Yeah. And it's like the real work, because if you're in a relationship with someone, which I think romantic relationships are always the best magnifying glass to all of this, to find it, your needs are going to bump up against theirs. You are operating in a system with someone else. Now, how do you have a need and they have a need and possibly both get met, or one have to compromise? That is what it means to be in a human system. But that also is, how do I maintain sovereignty and togetherness? They can coexist. And there's this idea that they can't, but they can. And I think deeply rooted in that is, in our principles of like what we say about liberated love, which is the name of the book for context for people listening, is that there's a devotion to truth that is like number one. But I think what's so apt to what we're talking about is there's a recognition that the other person's path is their path. And operating at the baseline of all of this is having a positive regard for ourselves and also for the other person. So when we start to make our way through this with a romantic partner, but we do it with our children, we do it with the people we interact with, you start to, if your child wants to go do something as an adult, let's say go to school and take something, and you don't want them to move away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You have to be with the honoring of their path and be with the disappointment that they're honoring their path. The same is true of romantic relationships. Now, how do you create some level of certainty and predictability that quote unquote commitments bring, but also recognizing, can the relationship hold the space of someone needing to grow in a direction that feels in conflict with the relationship? But can the relationship hold that space? Because if it can actually be the catalyst and move with the person, possibly, and we move together. Now, granted, sometimes paths veer apart, of course.
Yeah.
But when we're intentional, it changes everything. And I hope that we bring that level of intention because if I don't have a choice in a relationship with social media, then I'm now not autonomously choosing it.
Yeah.
I might as well be in a marriage where we take a vow till death do us part. But it's like, what kind of death? A metaphorical death or a real death, you
Yeah.
know? And I would argue that the same thing, we start to get imprisoned in other places because we still have work to do. And that's what I'm seeing is I still have work to do. Of course I do. I'll never say I don't, because then the universe will, as you said, Mack truck the shit out of me. Not even a question. It's like, oh, you thought you were done?
Yeah.
Here you go.
Right. Right. Queen, this is your call to greatness. If you are ready, and I mean truly ready, to shift anything in your outer experience, your outer reality, your finances, your health, your relationship, anything career related, anything spiritual, any shift that you want to make that has to do with your reality has to first start with shifting who you are, your self-identity. My Future Self digital course is your supportive blueprint that helps you achieve this. The inner shapes the outer. So when you get crystal clear on your core beliefs, your core values, your core desires, your high heart goals, when you learn how to rewrite parts of your past that maybe don't feel so great and instead leverage those experiences to be fuel for you to expand and to grow, this is how you start to change the game behind the game of life, which all starts and ends with you. I've designed this course from my heart, soul, and experience to be a femininely fierce experience for you to uncover and connect with your most authentic self. And as a Future Self student, you get 3 months free membership access to Queendom. This is where we really get to connect. Queendom is such a rad, sacred, empowered space where every month you get a live Q&A call with me so we can connect and troubleshoot any area of your life that you would like, or just get some encouragement from me as well as the other queens in the community. This is a really sacred space, and I will see you in Queendom. You just took us somewhere related to relationships and love, and there's another quote, but there's so many good ones. Choosing someone else should always be synonymous with choosing yourself. Anything else is just self-abandonment dressed up as love. I really love that. And let me just bring into my mind the one that I'm not seeing here, but that one, I don't know where it went. But it was this, I was listening to you. You were speaking about, when you really love somebody, I mean, the idea is truth is the baseline. I want you to be your greatest self, and I want to be my greatest self. So how do we use the truth? This is not your words, but this is kind of just my interpretation of it. How do we baseline? How do we make that the foundation to support each other to be our greatest self versus suppressing each other, or I'm afraid of you growing into a higher expression of yourself and vice versa, right? So I know I just gave you a lot because there's a lot that comes with you and it's all beautiful and meaningful. But yeah, so you can run wherever you want to go with that. But I think all of that holds so much value for people to really think about. It's a deeper, I'll say this really quick. First of all, it's expanded consciousness. You have to be willing to not be a lazy fucking thinker is how I bluntly say it.
I like that.
You know what I mean?
Yes,
like you gotta. There's
no, what does she mean?
That happens a lot with me. But also a willingness to dive deeper and to then respond in action. So I'll pass it over to you now. Willingness.
It's such a beautiful point of inquiry. I'm so happy you asked that. It's like the recognition of that level of depth of inquiry is actually the recognition of your own depth. And I think I get shivers thinking about it because to deny one's depth is to live on the surface and the superficiality, which doesn't mean you can't love Lamborghinis and all the fast lives. It's that you can't pretend that you don't have this incredible depth to your being. And some of us are terrified of that. I get it. Because to touch the depth of that being is to touch the depth of your feeling, to recognize the value in your capacity to feel. Francis Weller has this beautiful quote where he says that the soul loves to dwell in the darkness, that it lives on the edges. And that really just, I could feel that. I really discovered Francis when my now wife, I was going to say current wife, that sounds like I got another one coming. My only and will be my only wife, as far as I know. She introduced me to Francis Weller when we broke up in our first relationship 1.0. And I was in such deep, beautiful grief of the loss of our relationship. And it was the first time I navigated grief sober. And I had realized that grief, in depth of grief and sadness, lived so much unexplored love that I was afraid of being lost in it. And little did I know that it sounds so cheesy, but that I would find so much of myself in there. Yeah. Like untouched grief that I had not, like my loss of our relationship ended up being all the losses of relationship I'd never been with. Like no one had ever walked to me. And I don't want to say because it wasn't available, because I'm sure if I had expressed to people like, I need you to walk with me in this darkness, I'm sure my father would have, I'm sure my mother, I'm sure certain friends who had the capacity for that would have. But I discovered this whole other version of me, the part that self-abandons, the part that hasn't stood up for himself his whole life, and it was so beautiful. And I really thought that, I remember in the depths of it, I called a friend and he said, "How are you?" And it was about 2 weeks after Kylie and I broke up, and I was not good. I started crying, and it makes me emotional to think about. And he got in his car and drove 3 hours to where I was, which bad planning. I booked a cabin by myself in the woods, not great planning. But I can laugh at that now. Don't do that. But he dropped everything. And he sat with me. I actually didn't need more than that. I just needed to know that if I thought I was going to get lost in it, that I had this tether to the earth, this tether to, I guess I would probably say emotional safety, that I could be like, I'm going to lose it. And so I say all that because I think there's this, when we start to be with that depth of our being, and we start to actually say, you know what, it is our work in relationship to bring that forward in others, but to do it through bringing it forward in ourselves. And what a beautiful gift it is to say to someone you love that I'm afraid you're growing away from me.
Yeah.
Which is at the core of why we want to control someone's growth and expansion. We want to dim their light because we're afraid of our own. And I share a lot this idea that we try to save people from feelings that we don't know the value of yet. So like, I will be afraid of people's grief if I don't know the power of grief. Now, someone's going through a breakup. There's a part of me, I'm not going to lie, that I'm like, fuck yeah, like amazing. Like this is some of the most potent medicine. Yeah. And I think about when a relationship brings forward frictions, which normally we would say this is evidence of the problems in the relationship. Yeah. And that can be, obviously, it is true on a literal logistical level. But it's also evidence of what the relationship is trusting two people to work through. Whether together or apart, this relationship is saying, we need you to do this work if we want to go deeper. And I think that's the sacred nature of relationship. That can happen in a friendship. It can happen I just think there's nothing quite as deep as romantic love to motivate us,
Totally agree. And I want to share this with you. And I don't typically talk about my love life, not for any, it just doesn't.
Let's get into it. Yeah.
Well, this is a really special.
Roxanne.
Exactly.
Can't be the first time someone's done that. No,
oh my gosh.
Definitely not.
My whole life. I mean, I'm 45. I grew up when I heard Roxanne. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
So I had both.
You got a good name for music.
Thank you. I know. God,
Mark, I got nothing. I got a Bible. Get out of here.
Oh my gosh. Well, So actually, it's the snowboarder. Before we started recording, I was telling you, one of my ex-boyfriends, who's one of the greatest loves in my life and one of my best friends to this day. We separated. God, okay, I'm 45. I was 30. So wow, 15 years ago. We were together for about 3 years. Historically, up to that point, I was always the one to exit a relationship. Literally, I was always the one. No one had ever broken up with me before.
You're like,
right?
Peace out. Yeah.
Well, it's my self-expression and my authenticity. I'm so devoted to it that I know when I got to go, I got to go. And it's for your benefit too. And I've had those conversations. Like, I'm honoring you right now. You don't need to be with someone who knows that this isn't here anymore and that we're not here anymore, right? But with JP, I love you. I didn't see it coming, and it came one day. And we were separated a lot throughout that year. He was on tour, I was on tour. Anyways, it came out just one day, like one Sunday afternoon. Like, we gotta end this now. We were living together, so it was like,
Wow. Yeah.
And I was still very much in love with him, right? So I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And he's like, I love you, but like, I know where I got to go right now. And this isn't I can't do this and be going this way. And so fast forward the story. And I remember it was, devastating. The moment I was like, no way. It's like that shock moment. Like, what the fuck is this fucking, no, we could fix it. Let's go away. And because I've been writing my whole life, what a gift, right? Journaling, a diarist, and very honest with myself. I remember pausing and thinking, first of all, I love him. I don't love the idea of him. I don't love what he needs to be for him, for me. I love him. I've been in his shoes. If he truly feels like this is where he's got to go now, and it's not with me in this capacity, then if I really love him, I gotta accept it. And if I really love me, I gotta fucking hold it down for me right now too. Mm-hmm. And so, what was so cool about this is that he was an incredible boyfriend. Like, there was never he was always very respectful, as was I with him. And this brings in a piece that I really do want to open up and talk with you about. And it's the relationship between respect and love, because I think they belong together. What happened is, because I acknowledged him with love and respect, and finally I was like, okay, I get it. Not easy for me, but you got to go. I love you, and I'm going to love you as you go. And that allowed us to maintain our love and respect for each other. Romantically, things changed. But 15 years later, here I am, and I say this, and I know it's so mutual, but we love each other. And it's not this love of like, one day we get back together. I mean, you never know anything, but like, I don't have that dynamic has changed. But my point is that the love has been held in such strong tact, because I really believe that the respect was held together the whole way through, even when, it's devastating to me, but I chose to honor him and to honor myself at the same time. And I can say, now, what a powerful experience, and also for him too, because that wasn't easy for him. He does love me. No. It's just really special. Thanks for letting me share that with you. I've never shared that on
It's a beautiful story.
Thank you.
I think at the depths of it is the actual embodiment of unconditional love. It's the conditions are changing, but the love isn't.
Yeah.
And a lot of us, I think, especially if you're listening or watching and you're someone who's been left, that's actually the deepest work. To leave is, of course, hard. And I think the part that we don't celebrate the person who leaves, we shame them because we're all terrified of being left. But I think that stops once you've experienced leaving, and you have more compassion for the person who leaves because you realize they must go. It must be true because there's not another way.
Yeah.
When Kylie and I ended our relationship 1.0, we did a closing ceremony, which was very similar to what you're talking about. And what that demonstrated to me, and I had heard this from a guest I had on my podcast, that you should leave a relationship as you would a house for the new owner, that you prepare it, you fix it up, and I thought, wow, what a beautiful sentiment. And so Kylie and I, when we did the closing ceremony, which was probably the most powerful conversation I've ever had in my life, um, I remember pulling up in the car before I was going in to have it. And I remember thinking, I don't want to do this.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, okay. Like, do I not want to do this because I just genuinely don't want to? Or do I not want to do this because I'm afraid? Because the person who does this doesn't exist yet. And the answer was number two, which I was like, fuck. So of course I'm like, I got out of the car and I went in the house. And what was birthed by that decision, which I actually think is an important point of inquiry to anything that we don't, quote unquote, don't want to do, is that there's a process, there's a cooking, there's a maturation, there's an adulting, there's a alchemical process that occurs in the moment.
Yeah.
And it was through the conversation we had that I became someone I'd never been. I didn't know endings with such a deep level of reverence and respect and love. And I ultimately think that's what set the, we talk about this, that it ultimately set the stage for coming back together, because we already had evidence from each other that love didn't go anywhere, that if Kylie's path today pulled her away from me, she knows at the depths it might be painful, which that we can't pretend that's not true. But there's no question in my mind that I would love her through that, no matter what. I'd share my hurt, and I think when we start to experience love like that, there's no other way. You realize that, and I would say that's probably why I can sit with people who vehemently disagree with me. And as long as there's respect present, I got no problem. I love their perspective. I recognize that their perspective is what they came to through their unique experiences. I can't begin to understand that. It's only through being curious. And I think, what you're speaking to is such a beautiful thing for all of us to aspire to, because it's the actual embodiment of unconditional love and that deep sense of positive regard for the other person and for ourselves. You treat them well, and I think it's like that. If a relationship's not for them, it's not for me. Like that's there is no other way.
Right.
So you either get right with reality, which is part of our book, is like, get right with reality. Like, what is it that's real that you're not?
Yeah. And
that's why it's like, you could be in a relationship or single, and if you navigate the things we walk people through, you're going to change your life. It doesn't, it might be under the guise of romantic relationships, which I think is the most potent vehicle for this. But you can't then not bring it to every area of your life. It's an impossibility, because what you start to embody, what you're talking about with JP, that's, I'm sure, followed both of you through your whole life and your romantic life, of like, there's a new standard. What a standard that is, you know?
Yeah. Well, and
really,
and standard for self too. And I'd love to hear you speak on self-love. I'm curious to what is self-love to you, and how does it show up in your life, and how does it challenge you?
Well, I'd say that self-love to me is a set of habits and rituals that are aligned with values. So it's your choices. And if you love your choices, you'll love yourself. If you don't love your choices, you won't. And, you were talking about how, like, there is an element of incongruence that leads to the recognition of congruence, right? And so it's a necessary part, is to recognize that a choice isn't serving. But, how it shows up for me is like, wait, what is a combination of choices that would be liberating for me, that are actually serving me, that are actually feeding me? There's this idea that a lot of our motivations actually come initially from dark places. That it's like, I want to be enough. I'm a perfectionist. I want to hustle for worth. I'm angry at the world. I'm And that's great. But eventually it has to, and usually our coping mechanisms are things like alcohol, drugs, sex, right? Like
Yeah.
insert whatever. And eventually it has to switch to being a light motivation, which actually comes from a place of love for what we've created, love for who we are. And those coping mechanisms are different. There are things like nature, bathing in nature. There are things like having a boundary. There are things like meditation or breath work or cold plunging or whatever your habit is
Yeah.
that says like this vessel I'm in matters, my heart matters, and I think it's also probably no, it's for sure, not probably, the changing of how you eat, how you nourish yourself. And you think of nourishment. I love the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. They talk about how like nourishment is everything in your life, not just food. It's like, is this relationship nourishing? Is my behavior nourishing? And I think when we can get really clear on whether it is or is not, then the next question is like, okay, I got to get rid of it. Like, what would getting it into alignment look like?
Yeah.
And I think that's an ever evolving thing. I think that you're never 100% in integrity because you're always learning more things. And I don't know how long we can actually tolerate the awareness that we're out of integrity. I'd say it's not that long.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I'm sure everybody's tolerance is different, but I agree with you. And I'm so, regarding the nourishment, I love that you brought that in because you want, it's like what's giving to you, what's helping you flourish versus what's like an energy leak, what's,
Right.
taking from your essence, from your vitality. Vitality is huge for me. You want to hear your intuition and feel it better. Well, the more vitality you're operating with, the better able you're, to do that. Better able you are to do that. There's a through line that is very obvious with you and so appreciated with you, and it's this honesty piece, this self-honesty piece, and I think self-love and self-honesty. And it's not easy, right? Like to be honest with yourself. I mean, even when you're talking about the ceremony, you're like, fuck, it was number 2. That's the honest answer. But it's that willingness to be so honest with yourself. And that is a form of loving yourself, even if that honesty is like punching you in the fucking face, metaphorically, right?
Yeah, truth.
Would you say?
And I think the first truths you come to or you come right with or get right with, they're usually the punch to the face. But eventually you have no tolerance for your own deception because ultimately not owning the truth is your own deception. It's not anyone else's. We like to put it on other people. It's like I often see like in my own experience, the betrayals I've experienced in my life were always preceded by my own betrayals of myself. It just ended up like my no that I never engaged in led me to a moment in my life that was a clear no, that I was actually being betrayed on the other end because you only end up in those moments when you betray yourself. And I think it's easy to fall into the martyr, especially with great betrayals, which I did. I lived in the martyr for a long time. But it's actually so liberating to say, oh, there's actually a choice that preceded that's on me. And, like you can't change what happened in your life. That's just reality unless you can learn how to time travel, which is great.
Yeah.
But I can't.
Yeah.
And so since the agreement that you and I have about time is we can't go back, we can actually go backwards in terms of what we make things mean. Mm-hmm. And that can completely dissolve sticky moments of our past. And I think the way where people get stuck, especially in the conversation on social media, because you're kind of oscillating with the lowest consciousness. Not that we are oscillating with the lowest consciousness, but you're in conversation with people who are not actually interested in exploring life in the same way. Right. And that's okay. That adds diversity. It's not hierarchical. Right. It just is. But what's interesting is often the response to everything in our life happens for us is, okay, so I guess like child trafficking and rape and murder and war and all these things you're saying they're happening for us. Absolutely not. We're not saying being a victim is something you create.
Right.
Right. It's the word victim. You are a victim of someone else's behavior. No one wants to negate the actual pain and suffering that comes from that. At least I don't.
Yeah.
So it's like how can we be with the truth that we experience victimization?
Mm-hmm.
And what do we do with it?
Yeah.
If we go from I was a victim, okay, but I don't want to live there.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. It's like if it is happening for me, if I can just adopt that lens, then I can at least garner the lesson in it. And usually when you look at things from childhood, the
Mm-hmm.
lesson is usually that it wasn't safe for us
Mm-hmm.
to embody a no.
100%.
Wasn't safe.
Yeah.
So you don't want to shame the 5-year-old or the 8-year-old in you or the ones
Yeah.
is to say, how do I access that fucking no now?
Yeah.
Like, you wouldn't let me grow? You wouldn't let me choose my passions? Fuck you.
Right.
Like, how do I do that now?
Yes.
You wouldn't let me have boundaries? You bulldoze my shit?
Yeah.
How do I get so boundaried up now that love flows through it, And so it's like being able to be in the both and that's an art, being in the both and, especially if we source power from martyrdom. If you source power from being a victim, which is different than, being an actual victim versus living a victim mentality, which I'm always there's so much small print to all that because I don't want people to experience the minimization of what's happened in their life.
Truly right there with you. Again, not things that I talk about so much in my show, but also not like hiding it. My siblings and I and my mother, for a good period of my youngest childhood, hardcore domestic violence. Father beat our ass, right? And you're just getting to know me, right? So you don't know too much about, but I'm sure you're also very...
I like
it. Most people who take in any of what I share would not necessarily ever put that together. Because usually, and I'm not putting anybody down, but usually these kind of circumstances create a different mindset. Whereas and I don't even know how the fuck I did this. Like, how did I not become a victim of it?
Right.
And how did I instead, there is something, in psychology, post-traumatic growth, we could maybe say that, right? But nothing was even conscious in that way for me and my siblings. All of us is like, nothing in my life that is hard that I've been through or that I continue to go through has ever taken me from me. If anything, I've come I've ran into myself and gone deeper into myself, but I'm fully with you. And I can speak as someone who has, lived really traumatic experiences from my childhood, that there is a difference of becoming a victim of, and having that victim mindset and having that, take away your agency and, and then let that be the rest of your life versus, okay, this happened to me. How do I and it's not like it has to be an immediate thought and action, but how can I leverage this experience to become a higher expression of me or create a life that is outstanding from this? So, like, for me, it's I leverage my hardships. I look back and I'm like, well, shit, if we handled that, like, come on, life.
Right.
What do you got?
Right. There's evidence of your
resilience.
Self-worth. There's evidence of your resilience. There's evidence that when you're met with something, you rise.
Yes.
It's like I could be in the middle of something that sucks. And I didn't used to be able to do this, but I can now be like, okay, like what is being asked of me? Because this one really sucks.
Yeah.
What's being asked of me? Okay.
Yeah.
And there's, it's hard because if like my predisposition is to go to martyrdom. So it's like, how do I allow that part of myself that's where I feel safe? Why me? That's not fair. Those are all, they can be right in the reality of that part of me.
Yeah.
But there's also this part of me that's like you're talking about. I studied, positive psych. So it's like post-traumatic growth is all about that. And it's like, what's the difference between people who grow and people who don't? And it really is perspective.
Yeah.
And it's like, it sounds simple. It is. And I think what has to overlay all of this is that no work is incomplete without some level of nervous system work.
Yeah.
And that's important for people to understand. And that requires that you be internally and externally resourced so you can help reprogram your nervous system. We talked about like being in the company of other healthy people allows you to learn what healthy feels like. Because,
Yes.
I'll get asked a lot, like, why do I attract unavailable or chaotic people? And it's like, because chaos is love to you. Unpredictability is hot. Eventually, when you learn to trust yourself, you learn that untrustworthy people are not attractive. And then you're like, wait, so if you say you're going to do something, you do it? How did that become the biggest aphrodisiac I ever met in my life? Like my wife, when I share something that's going on for me and my experience with her,
Hmm.
her reply is almost always, yeah, I hear you. That I can imagine that that's hard. And you're right. I do that, or that is what I did. And or a reflection back, well, this was my experience of it.
Mm.
There's a deep sense of respect and reverence for each other. And there's not the denial of each other's experience, but there's like, what's so hot is she has self-reflection.
Yes.
And she also has discernment about what I'm saying is true or not, which I
Mm.
hate some of the time.
No, I mean, it's so incredible. And you're the whole conversation with you on really everything you share. And I'll insert this and then go back to what I was just going to say, Queen of doing this. Not that long ago on Instagram, I saw a post that you put up and you were talking about, you're like, I'm done. Like I'm not split anymore. And I'm going to, open up about more things than even just love and relationships and other things that are important to you, which essentially I feel is really all related to self-mastery, right? And self-actualization, right? And I really love that because again, just getting to know you more recently, I mean, this is our first, sort of real life interaction. It's,
We'll move it to the literal, not the digital.
Yeah, exactly. But, you have so much to contribute to the conversation of self-mastery, self-actualization, and certainly, love and relationships, and really it all goes together. What I was going to say before that insert was just how much I appreciate your conversations and message on love and relationship. And I'm excited that you have this book coming out April 13th. Is that right?
April 16th.
April 16th. Okay. And this episode will drop before that. So we'll make sure that we have everything to
Amazing.
Yeah. Liberated love. What is your greatest hope for any reader who grabs this book?
Well, I think for anybody, it's my hope for them is to see that the challenges they have relationally are actually opportunities for healing, for growth, to find their voice, to figure out where they forget about themselves, or, and through relationship, using this material that is trusting you. I think about it too from a lineage perspective. It's like your lineage, out of all the people they could choose, trusts you with healing. Now, of course, we're like, well, I didn't ask for the U-Haul that came, the baggage. But the beautiful thing is we get to, through healing, get to hand the bags back, but we also get to take the bags back if we handed some to our kids. So I think my hope is that everyone finds and creates the types of relationship where they feel like they can be their best and most authentic and most real self, and that everyone who's honored to be in relationship with them would get that. Because, as you mentioned earlier, it's like, why would our relationship not be the place that would want us to come most alive? And so it's actually in service of love that you come most alive. It's in service of everybody in relationship with you. Why would I want a friend who is like, I feel like I can't do everything I love and dream in order to make sure you're not emotionally disrupted? What the fuck? All I want is I want to look at my friend and say, you're capable of everything. If that ends up outgrowing me, leaving me in the dust, I'll be dust. I don't care, And that's what I hope for people. And I don't just hope it, like it is actually possible. And the book walks through like, where do the blueprints, what are attachment styles, how the nervous system interweaves between these things. It talks about Kylie and I's story. It also talks about client stories. So it gives a lot of people context to their own experience, gives exercises. So it's not just the what, which I think is important because it allows us to have more compassion for why we do what we do. Yeah. But it's also like, what do we want to create and how do we do it? It's the how. It's like the path. It's everything I've learned before I met Kai, everything she learned before she met me, and everything we learned together because we really wish this book had existed when we were not sure how to navigate. Should we break up or stay? And so if you're single or in a relationship, it is very apropos. And if you just would like to figure out how to look at your relationship patterns to crush life, it'll show you that.
Yeah, I love it. What a gift. I mean, honestly, thank you so much for everything that you're doing. You are a true contributor, and I mean that with all my heart, truly.
Thank you.
Before we say see you soon, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you would like to live in this conversation? No pressure. Just, I'd like to ask that question before we wrap out.
No, I think you did such a tremendous job of extracting the information from me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you for trusting me, and thank you to you listening for trading time. It means, I do not take that lightly. It means the world to me.
Thank you so much. Okay, shout out all the links in the description, but Instagram, give it to us.
Yeah,
Podcast.
Instagram. We'll see if I'm still on there eventually, but I'm on there at Create the Love. I'm playing around a little with, I was listening to someone talking to, not to extend our podcast much longer, but I was listening to someone talking to someone from Meta, and they have a very successful social media platform. And they were saying, hey, all these other people are starting new platforms and they're crushing it. I'm a great content creator. Why am I not getting the same level of engagement I used to get? And they said, well, maybe you might need to just start a new Instagram. And the person was like, I'm sorry, what? I've spent 9 years. And I'm hearing this being like, I've been on here for 9 years. You want me to restart? I've put content on for 9 years.
Wow.
So I've actually just been playing with how does a younger Instagram account engage with people versus a new one, just to see how the tools work.
Yeah.
Under the hood. But yeah, you Create the Love on Instagram, podcast, Mark Gross Podcast. And then if you buy the book, you can go to liberated-love.com. It'll bring everyone to where they need to go. And you also get a free download of a meditation we created and a workbook that goes with the meditation.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Oh, yeah. No, thank you. And whenever you make it back to Vegas, we definitely have to link up. And yeah, I'm here in full support. So to be continued. Thank you so much.
Be continued.
Thanks so much for listening, you guys. Please like, subscribe, and share. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star rating and review.